Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Shorts episode number 4. The Jerilderie man who could have been King of England. Michael Edward Ebney-Hastings lived in Jerilderie, New South Wales in the southern Riverina and was a rice farmer. In a 2004 documentary, Britain's Real Monarch, it alleged that he was the rightful monarch of England instead of Queen Elizabeth. From February 1960 until November 2002, he held the courtesy title of Lord Mauchline. Michael Edward Ebney-Hastings, the 14th Earl of Loudon, was born Michael Edward Lord on the 22nd of July 1942 in Sussex, England, to Captain Walter Strickland Lord and Barbara Ebney-Hastings, 13th Countess of Loudon. Hastings was born in and grew up in a small house at Hastings, Sussex. The Earls of Loudon had once owned castles and sporting estates, but while the title would eventually pass from his grandmother, the 12th Countess of Loudon, to his mother, Scottish titles can pass through the female line, it was his Aunt Jean who inherited the Loudon estates in Scotland. His parents' marriage in 1939 did not survive the war, and they divorced in 1945. Michael grew up at his mother's home in Ashby de la Zouch, Leicestershire, England, a town where one of his family's castles, Ashby de la Zouch Castle, is located. His mother remarried in November 1945 to Captain Gilbert Frederick Greenwood, and they had 2 children. Gilbert Greenwood died only 6 years after they married, and Barbara married for the 3rd time to Peter Griffiths in September 1954, and they had 3 daughters. As a youth, Michael was educated at Ampleforth College in North Yorkshire. He then lived with his mother at Ashby de la Zouch in Leicestershire, and his name was legally changed via deed poll to Michael Edward Ebney-Hastings. He sailed for Australia on the 17th of April 1960 under what was called the Big Brother scheme when he was 18. He signed on for 2 years as a hired hand, and for the next few years he jackarooed on sheep and cattle properties, put his hand to orange picking, worked for a stock and station agency, and sold encyclopedias door to door. In the Canberra Times on the 19th of October 1960, titled British Peer a Migrant, an 18-year-old British peer, Lord Mauchline, reached Melbourne today from Britain on the liner Fairsea as a migrant under the Big Brother scheme. Lord Mauchline, who travelled as Mr. Michael Ebney-Hastings, hopes to become a jackaroo. I believe Britain has had it as a country. There is far more opportunity out here. And Michael said, me and a mate started selling Encyclopedia Britannicas in Bondi, but it was so hot we started to go into pubs. We got so drunk that we couldn't remember which one we left them in. He was soon drawn to country life, and particularly a local switchboard operator from Jerilderie, Noeline McCormick. They married on the 25th of January 1969 in Deniliquin and made their home at Jerilderie, where Michael worked and farmed for Rice Research Australia. He described his wife as a fiery Australian redhead, and she died in 2002 before the BBC crew arrived at his doorstep. He said she would not have been impressed. She would have told me to bloody well behave myself and not get carried away by all this. So where does the theory come from that he was the rightful king? He was the heir general of George Plantagenet, the younger brother of Edward IV of England. If Edward IV had been illegitimate, and the crown of England had descended by male preference before 1500, then George Plantagenet and his heirs would have been monarchs of England. In 2004, a documentary, Britain's Real Monarch, was broadcast on Channel 4 in the UK and repeated the claim that Michael Ebney-Hastings, as a senior descendant of George Plantagenet, 1st Duke of Clarence, was the rightful King of England. This argument involved 2 disputed claims. Firstly, that Edward IV of England was illegitimate, based on an accusation that his supposed father, Richard, Duke of York, was absent at the time when Edward was thought to have been conceived. And second, that the Plantagenet crown should have descended by male preference. Also, Henry VI had placed an attainder on Edward after he was restored to the throne, and named George, Duke of Clarence, as heir to the throne after Henry VI and his legitimate issue. This was on his maternal line. The British documentary stated that Hastings was a descendant of the House of York, which famously battled the House of Lancaster for the rights to the British crown in the 15th century during the War of the Roses. Ebney-Hastings was a committed Australian Republican and he expressed no interest in pursuing his claim to the throne, although he was amused by it. He refrained from using his title publicly. Michael had 2 sons and 3 daughters. He was a councillor of the Jerilderie Shire and was elected in 2004 and re-elected in 2008. He spent 48 years in Jerilderie and became a solid citizen. He was chairman of the local historical society, and perhaps the greatest indication that he'd become a dinky-die Aussie, he was appointed a life member of the Jerilderie AFL Footy Club. Michael was interviewed on the 30th of May 2007. Getting to know Michael Ebney-Hastings, 14th Earl of Loudon. Michael Ebney-Hastings, 64, is well known not only in his hometown of Jerilderie, but also all across the UK. He is, as some say, the man who would be king. According to a noted medieval scholar, Michael Jones, documents prove that Edward IV of England, who reigned from 1461 to 1483, was illegitimate and therefore ineligible to inherit the crown. Instead, the crown should have passed to George Plantagenet, 1st Duke of Clarence, a direct descendant of Ebney-Hastings. While the thought of being king is met with humour, Ebney-Hastings is serious about another title that has been handed down in his family for generations. He's the 14th Earl of Loudon. John Campbell, the 4th Earl of Loudon, is the county's namesake. So a little more detail on how the earldom was descended from Sir Matthew Campbell of Loudon, Sheriff of Ayr, who was born in 1510 and died in 1593. His son and heir, Hugh Campbell, the 1st Lord Campbell of Loudon, which was created in June 1601, and his heir, John Campbell, the 2nd Lord Campbell of Loudon, later the 1st Earl of Loudon. The Lordship of Campbell of Loudon has been held by the Earls of Loudon since the earldom's creation on May the 12th, 1633. Campbell of Loudon is one of 3 major cadet branches of Clan Campbell. The Loudon crest is an eagle with 2 necks displaying gulls in flames of fire proper, with the motto, "I bide my time." The first Earl became a leading member of the Covenanter movement that opposed attempts by the King and Archbishop Laud to impose a new liturgy and prayer book on the Church of Scotland. The 4th Earl raised a regiment of Highlanders to fight the Jacobites during the 1745 Rising and later became an unpopular commander-in-chief of the British forces in North America. Despite his Protestant antecedents, Hastings was raised a Catholic. On the death of the 12th Countess in 1960, his mother, Barbara, inherited the Loudon titles, as well as the baronies of Bertrow, Stanley and Hastings, and moved to a small house in Ashby de la Zouch in Leicestershire. Her son was given the courtesy title of Lord Mauchline. Ebney-Hastings inherited the title from his mother, Barbara Huddleston Ebney-Hastings, the 13th Countess of Loudon, in 2002, and his son, Simon Michael Ebney-Hastings, is in line to succeed his father. As the heir, Simon has the courtesy title of Lord Mauchline. He was asked, what does it mean to be an earl? Any perks or any drawbacks? Michael said it's a Scottish title handed down. In our case, it can go from male to female. Usually titles go from male to male, and in some cases, if there isn't a male, it goes to a female. I'm the first male earl since about 1920. Loudon is part of the Campbells. I've got 2 sons and 3 daughters, so the title will go on. They take titles very seriously. Financially, the title doesn't mean a thing. Earls are high up the order of the monarchy, though. It does come with some perks. Over here, I'm very well known, especially when I go to England every 18 months or so. It gets me perks in England, and socially it is very good. And the reporter asked, a few years ago there was a historian who claimed that you had a legitimate claim to the British throne. Anything come of that? And he said that it'll still big here. To be king or queen, you have to do 2 things. You have to have Plantagenet blood, the royal bloodline, and to be legitimate. Edward IV was proven to be illegitimate, which means he shouldn't have been king. That means George, 1st Duke of Clarence, should have been. If you follow his bloodline, you get my grandmother, Edith Ebney-Hastings, the 12th Countess of Loudon, my mother and me. We have a lot of fun with it. How did your family and friends react? I've always had a title. Before becoming Earl, I was Lord Mauchline. The town I live in is little. It's about 1,000 people. They get a few laughs out of it, same as I did. I have no interest in racing over to England. Honestly, I think the Queen has done a good job, better than I could have. The Earl of Loudon title originates in Scotland. How did you end up in Australia? He said, I decided to go with a bit of travelling. I arrived in Australia, got married, had 5 kids and 7 grandchildren. My wife died in 2003 and 3 weeks ago I got engaged. What is a typical day for you like? He said, I'm retired. I used to work for Rice Research Australia. As a Shire councillor, I do a lot and I'm president of the Historical Society. Margaret, my fiancée, is a councillor in the adjacent Shire. Plus we have a wedding to plan within the next 18 months, I guess. What is the best part or worst part of your hometown? The best part, it's small, it's friendly, and life here is wonderful. Worst part, once the kids grow up and they want to go to university, you lose them a bit. I've been lucky, my family has stayed close. We don't have any major health care, we don't have a very big hospital. We're an hour and a half from the bigger town and 3 hours from Melbourne. It's a wonderful life though, especially for the children. We have great athletic fields. Michael Ebney-Hastings died on the 30th of June 2012. The 14th Earl of Loudon had been battling a debilitating illness and had been in and out of hospital in the lead up to his death. His funeral was held at Jerilderie. And on the 6th of July 2012, there was an article. He was known to Jerilderie locals as Kingsy, but Michael Ebney-Hastings was in fact the 14th Earl of Loudon. If history had taken another turn, he could have been King of England, but lived out his life in Jerilderie, where he has died aged 69. Instead of ruling Britain, he was content to immerse himself in Australian country life as a beer-loving jackaroo who became a rice farmer and Shire councillor. He arrived in Australia as an 18-year-old in 1960, not long out of the elite Benedictine Ampleforth College in York. One of his mates was Andrew Parker Bowles, first husband of Camilla, now wife of King Charles. With £50 to his name, content to subsume his then title of Lord Mauchline, in order to experience the wide open spaces of an egalitarian society with none of the stuffiness he left behind. He inherited the title 14th Earl of Loudon from his mother, the 13th Countess of Loudon, Barbara Ebney-Hastings, on her death in 2002. His father was Captain Walter Strickland Lord, and it wasn't until 2 years later that he got the shock of his life when he was informed in plausible detail that he was the rightful heir to the British throne. In his typical laconic style, he recalled thinking at the time what people around Jerilderie would think. They'd say, oh, it's that eccentric pommic bastard again. The turn of events began with a phone call from a BBC producer asking if he could visit to discuss evidence pointed to Hastings being the real King of England. I thought they were pissed, he told one interviewer. The Channel 4 documentary crew, led by actor Tony Robinson, duly arrived at his modest, weatherboard house in Jerilderie and laid out the evidence on his dining table as they filmed the documentary Britain's Real Monarch. The program was based on the research of Glasgow University medievalist Michael Jones, who claimed to have unearthed a document at Rouen Cathedral proving that at the time of the conception of Edward IV, who reigned with interruptions from 1461 to 1483, his supposed parents, Richard Duke of York and Lady Cecily Neville, were more than 160 kilometres apart. Richard was fighting the French near Paris, while Lady Cecily was at court in Rouen. Jones argued that Edward was the product of an adulterous liaison between the Queen and a French archer. The theory, if true, would invalidate the claims of every English monarch since. Since Edward was illegitimate, Jones argued, the royal line should have ascended through his supposedly legitimate younger brother George, Duke of Clarence, who would, according to tradition, meet a sticky end in a butt of Malmsley wine in 1478. With the help of Debrett's, Jones had traced the Plantagenet bloodline down through the generations to the Earl of Loudon, Michael Hastings. At first, Hastings thought the whole thing was bullshit, but soon realised there was substance to the claims. The more I watched the documentary, the more I'm convinced that they're right, and I probably should have been King of England. But he was never going to act on the evidence and pursue any claim. I take my title very seriously, but the thing about being king is a bit of a joke, Hastings said. I've no intention of chasing over there and laying claim to palaces and crown jewels. I'm quite happy in Jerilderie. He would go over to England for royal ceremonies, which he took seriously, but he always found it quite funny. He said residents of the town got more excited than he did, to the extent that when he arrived at a friend's house for Christmas dinner, they all stood up and sang God Save the King as I walked in. Hastings said he sympathised with the Queen because of the onerous job she had, cooped up in Buckingham Palace under constant scrutiny and unable to live a normal life. It's a shit of a job. I wouldn't take it for quids. What a terrible way to live. They can't even pick their noses without someone writing about them. And in a 2005 interview, he also stated that he showed little interest in pursuing his claim to the monarchy, citing the intense public scrutiny endured by the royals. He joked that his claim to the crown could prove lucrative if confirmed. He said, "I reckon I might send Lizzie," that is Queen Elizabeth II, "a bill for back rent. The old girl's family have been living in my bloody castle for the last 500 years. Michael's children, his firstborn, the Lady Amanda Louise Ebney-Hastings, was born in 1969 and she married Sebastian Katina in 1992 and they have 2 children. The second, the Lady Lisa Marie Ebney-Hastings, was born on the 23rd of March 1971 in Jerilderie. She married Grant Roth and they had 2 boys. She died on the 23rd of May 2012 in Jerilderie, aged only 41. The third child was Simon Michael Ebney-Hastings, who's now the 15th Earl of Loudon. He was born on the 29th of October 1974. He was known as the Honourable Simon Ebney-Hastings from his birth until 2002, when his father became the 14th Earl. He then held the courtesy title Lord Mauchline from 2002 until his father's death, and is now the 15th Earl of Loudon. He's a bachelor who works for a fabrics company in Wangaratta, Victoria. And the heir presumptive is his younger brother, the Honorary Marcus William Ebney-Hastings, who has taken on the title of Lord Mauchline. Simon was chosen by His Majesty to carry one of the gold spurs of the royal regalia, emblems of knighthood and chivalry, to be presented to King Charles III at his coronation. Simon is the only Australian to have played an official role in the coronation. In a statement provided by some media outlets, Simon said he was delighted to be asked to bear the large golden spurs, part of the ceremony dating back to the coronation of Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, in 1189. Simon's also a Catholic and advocates for the canonisation of his ancestor, Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury. The patronage and honours that Simon holds: he's the hereditary governor and patron of Repton School in Derbyshire. He's a patron of Ashby de la Zouch Museum. He's a patron of the Friends of Loudon Kirk. He's the president on the Board of Governors for St Andrew's First Aid Australia. He's a patron of the Melbourne Highland Games in Australia, which was formerly the Ringwood Highland Games. He's a patron of Clan Campbell Society of Australia. He's also patron of the Barnett 1471 Battlefield Society. He's a patron of the Australian Day Council in Victoria. He's the protector of the Order of St Thomas of Acre. He was Kentucky Colonel 2002, the highest honour at Commonwealth of Kentucky, USA. He's the esteemed friend of Loudon Museum in Leesburg, Loudon County, Virginia, in the USA. And he was Chieftain of the Day in 2002 and 2003 in the Brigadoon Highland Games at Bundadoon in New South Wales. And he was the Chieftain of the Day in 2023 at the Aberdeen Highland Games. Michael's fourth born was the Lady Rebecca Lee Ebney-Hastings, born in 1974, and she married Bradley Belling and they had 1 son. And his youngest child, the Honorary Marcus William Ebney-Hastings, was born in 1981 and is now Lord Mauchline. So I hope you enjoyed the intriguing story of a man that people say was meant to be King of England that lived in such a small town in country New South Wales. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch.